On today's Join Us in France, the Canal Saint-Martin in Paris. Is it all hype or is it worth a visit? This is Join Us in France, episode 119. Hello, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is the place where I tell you about my travels and discovery of France, and also where I interview other people who visit France. I love France. I was born and raised here. I live in France, but in my early 20s, I left France to go live in the UK for 2 years and then in the US for 18 years. So when I moved back, I had to rediscover my own country, one vacation day at a time. I'm having fun bringing you along for the ride and sharing with you what I've learned and what I think will help you when you come to France. The shout out for today goes out to Frederick Holmshaw for putting some money in the tip jar. Thank you so much, Frederick. Tipping your guide is good for the soul and very much appreciated. If you would also like to give a donation and support the show, you can do that by going to joinusinfrance.com/support. It's all explained there. I also want to mention that I've created a new Join Us in France closed group in Facebook, and that it's been received extremely positively. That makes me very happy. Join Us in France has had a Facebook page for a long time, but it's mostly me posting, and I've decided that it was time to create a closed group in addition, so that we can more easily share our experiences and exchange ideas. The closed group doesn't have as many people in it, but it has a lot more participation from everyone, so that's a really good thing. If you have a question, you want to suggest something, ask it to the group. Lots of people will see it, and you will get great feedback. People have also been posting some of their summer pictures, and that is wonderful. Thank you. Keep them coming. The way closed groups work is that only members of the group can read posts. So it gives us more privacy, and I feel more comfortable sharing stuff if I know if it's not visible to the whole world. You know, it's a closed group, not a secret group. That means that you can search for the group in Facebook, and again, it's called Join Us in France closed group, and you can ask me to join. A secret group, you can't even search for it. So that seemed a little bit, extreme to me. So long as people have to be members to be able to read and comment, I'm good with that. So join us there. It's a good place. So again, it's the Join Us in France closed group in Facebook. On today's show, I bring you my conversation with my good friend Brenda about the Canal Saint-Martin. Brenda and I met in college in the US many, many moons ago, and we've been going on vacation together occasionally, as often as we can. And this year, my husband and I met her and her husband in Paris, and we spent 5 wonderful days together there. We did a lot of exploring. It was great. So she'll be on several episodes so we can tell you all about it. And now on with the interview. Hello, Brenda. How are you?
Good. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. We're pretending that we're just greeting each other, but really we've been talking for 15 minutes. So that's why we sound a little odd. But this is my good friend, Brenda. We have known each other for, 25 years?
Yes. I met you when I was 5.
That's a good one. I've known you longer than my husband. Can you believe it?
And I can't.
Anyway, welcome to the show. It is awesome to have you on the show because Brenda and I, not only do we go back a long time, but Brenda has this thing for France.
I do. I'm a Francophile.
You're a Francophile, and you lived in France for a while, and now you live in California. But we were recently in France together. She and her husband came to Paris, and I thought, well, I can't let her have peace and quiet with her husband in Paris. I have to go join the party. So that's what we did.
And I had a wonderful time.
We had a great time. It was lovely. So we are going to do several episodes with Brenda because she has a keen eye for what's good and what's bad about places. And so we want her to share her ideas. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the Canal Saint-Martin in Paris, the very popular Canal Saint-Martin that all the bloggers can't shut up about. And apparently I'm joining the crowd, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be as up about it as they are. We'll see. So, let me just give a little bit of background about it, and feel free to interrupt at any time to just interject something you know that I don't, because there's probably plenty you know that I don't. So this canal is, it's like north, east of Paris a little bit. It is 4.5 kilometers long, and it ends at the Seine. It was built originally in 1825, and it was built, strangely enough, to bring drinking water to various areas of Paris. There are 9 locks on this canal and lots of bridges. I think it's 10 bridges, foot bridges. But there's only 25 meters of slope altogether because it's only 4.5 kilometers, so it's, it's short. But it belongs to a network of canals that are altogether 130 kilometers long. So it's kind of easy to be walking along a different canal and not know it, because it might have changed names, and it's not like they say, oh, you've left the Canal Saint-Martin, you're now in a different canal. They maybe in some parts, but not everywhere. There are 3 metro stops that can take you to the various locations along the canal. They are République, République, Goncourt, and Jaurès. Do you remember which one you used?
I believe we got off at Jaurès.
Jaurès. And it was fairly easy to find?
A little. It was a bit of a walk, and I got to tell you, where the stop is a little bit of a scary part of the park.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bums and hobos, homeless.
That's the biggest problem with that area, actually. And we'll get back to that in a minute. The Canal Saint-Martin was extremely helpful to Paris in the 19th century and until the middle of the 20th century. It was used heavily. It brought not only drinking water to Paris, but a lot of merchandise, a lot of goods. It was a very active commercial canal for about 150 years. Why did they build it to begin with? Well, under Napoleon, Paris had a big problem with bad water. Dysentery, cholera happened at regular intervals, and there was an administrator called Chabrol who suggested that maybe they could get clean water from a river called l'Ourcq, about 100 kilometers northeast of Paris. They found the funding. They had to create a couple of private companies. One is La Compagnie des Canaux de Paris, which they created in 1818. And they also created a separate company called La Compagnie du Canal Saint-Martin to do the actual work. Now, both of these companies were privately funded, and they laid the first stone for the Canal Saint-Martin on May 3rd, 1822, and it was inaugurated 3 years later on November 4th, 1825. Then, later came Haussmann, in 1860, and if you've been listening to the show, you've heard his name many times because he's one who brought a lot of changes to Paris. And one of the problems he had was the dang canal kept on, interfering with his avenues that he wanted to create everywhere. So he covered up the canal in parts. So there are some areas of the canal that are underground, and they also had to feed a lot less water to the canal so that the barges could go under these covered areas. And so starting in 1862, there are steam engines pulling the barges under the covered parts. Do you know how the barges were pulled outside of the covered parts? Can you take a guess?
Are you asking me, or are you
Yes,
asking Reed?
I'm asking you.
Well, I do know. I don't need to guess, but they were pulled by mules and horses, correct?
Actually, no, you're wrong.
Oh,
In
I
this
am wrong.
You are wrong. In this particular canal, it was humans that
Oh,
pulled
really?
the barges. It was cheaper than mules and oxen. They had so much cheap labor in Paris that they could just hire humans to pull the barges. It wasn't very long, 4.5 kilometers. So up until 1920, you could actually see people pulling barges along the Canal Saint-Martin. Isn't that crazy? Just wow.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy. That's rough work too. I'm just trying to picture what the life of a barge puller would have been like.
Yeah, not great, I suppose. But so by 1960, there was commercial freight on the canal up until then, but it was down to very little because of competition from roads and rail, and slowly all the buildings that went along with all that commercial activity, so docks and storage houses and all that, they also disappeared. In 1970, they had briefly a project to cover up the whole canal with a freeway, because that's what we did in the 70s and the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. They just wanted to cover everything with freeways and apartment buildings. But thankfully, they gave up on that, and so we still have the canal today. Between 1988 and 2012, so this is recent now, the average price of rent around that area went up a lot, up faster than anywhere else in Paris. And there's even on one of the streets called Rue de Marseille, they have a lot of luxury boutiques and all that, which is kind of strange. But anyway, today, this canal is almost 100% used by tourists. If you see a boat on there, it's probably full of tourists, such as yourself, Brenda. And you're going to tell us about it. So now I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to let you tell us what you saw, what you liked, what you didn't like. We already know you didn't like all the homeless people that live around the area.
Well, I have to say that going into this, I think my perception was a little colored by the fact that I do know, having lived in the southwest part of France, am very familiar with the Canal du Midi.
Right.
Which is, an UNESCO World Historic Site. It's very well maintained. Most of it is very well maintained, and it's just beautiful. And the scenery around it is very, very beautiful. And so I highly recommend anyone who's in that area to check out the Canal du Midi. Yeah. So having had that experience 2 years ago, we were in the Southwest visiting Annie again, and we had a chance to take a little boat out with our kids. We were on a little tourist boat. We went through some of the locks out of Carcassonne. Yeah. And it's just beautiful. It's got and I know, Annie, you've done some podcasts about it, right. But it's got all these trees planted along it. It's very rural. It takes you out into the countryside. The scenery is gorgeous. So
it's bucolic, let's put it that way.
Yes, very much so. So, of course, my perception of this canal being set very, very much in an urban environment was colored by my experience with the Canal du Midi. Right. Going through the locks, it was very interesting. So I'll walk you through our experience. Okay. We kind of dumped out into the middle of this park that was it was a little where we were when we got off the subway. It was a little bit worrisome. And after we got our bearings, we actually did need to use our GPS on our phone to find the entrance. We had already done our research on the website. The website's not super informative, but it did say that it's near the Boat House. Okay. A little restaurant called the Boat House. So we kind of use that as our point of reference. Okay. And so we followed out, and it was about a couple kilometers walk to get to this, and we had to go on a big bridge that went up over the river. By the time we reached over there, we kind of found this little paved path that led us that way. As we followed that path, you could see the real heart of the La Villette Park and what was the main attraction there. Because I got to tell you, I've never been over to that part of Paris. And when I got off that subway, I'm like, this is La Villette? I was really disappointed. Because I'd heard a lot of talk about it.
Yeah, La Villette is a new big museum. It's a science museum. There's a museum of music. It's a little bit out of the way. And it's fine if you have something you specifically want to see there, but I wouldn't go otherwise. I mean, if you're only in Paris for a week, I don't see any need to go there. But anyway, okay.
So as we followed it in, we're starting to see some really cool stuff. We saw this big, shiny geodesic dome. Right. I'm not even sure what it was. You could probably tell me what that was.
Yeah, I think it was the Dôme de la Villette. I think it's called Dôme de la Villette, but I would have to check on that because I haven't been in a while.
And as we started walking more in towards the boathouse, we could see more and more people, and there were a lot of things along the canal. They actually had some water attractions. They had, it was that point where we hadn't brought our kids this time, and my first thought was, it's too bad I didn't know about this the last time we were here. Mm-hmm. When we were with the kids, but we were only in the city for a few days at that point, so we probably wouldn't have had the time to go out there. But if you're in Paris longer, I think it would be a really cool place to take kids because they had like these little bikes that you could ride on the water with big inflatable tires that you're riding around on the surface. Yeah, and then they had little canoes and it looked really cute. They had little obstacle courses that you could go through. It looked like kind of like a water carnival.
So did it have a name, that park?
I don't know. All I know is it was right across the canal from where we got on our boat. Okay,
so I'll look it up, but I'll try to find the name of it and give you, coordinates. But it's close to that boathouse restaurant that you were mentioning anyway. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So we made our way over to the boat. We got onto the boat. You buy the tickets on the boat so that you go into the bottom of the boat. It's a double-decker, really big boat. It's probably about at least the size of a good-sized bateau mouche.
Okay.
And so we got on the boat. We bought our tickets. And then we went up to the top. It was a warm day. We were out in the sun. So definitely on a warm summer day, I recommend hats if you've got them and water because we were baking and there was no way to get drinks on the boat. It was a 2.5 hour boat trip. So yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's a long time.
Yes.
That's way longer than like the bateau mouche, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Bateau mouche will take you 1 hour at most.
Yes, and the majority of that time, it is definitely in the canal because going through the locks takes a lot of time.
Of course. The locks take forever, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's 9 of them, so... Yeah.
Right.
And it's exciting, the first couple, but then you're like,
The first couple locks are really cool, especially when you sail into... You go into the lock and it stops. And you look forward ahead of you, and wherever you see ahead of you, for example, might be a bridge. As Annie mentioned, there's lots of bridges going over this canal, but the bridge is super low,
right?
And if you were to sail straight, there's no way on earth your boat would get underneath that bridge. But as the lock, drains of water, your boat starts to go down low, and then you're on the level where you can go under the bridge. And you're like, oh, okay, I see how it works.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yes, it was cool. So the actual mechanics of the canal it was awesome to see. Of course, I was familiar with it after having done the Canal du Midi.
Yeah.
But it was still really interesting to see.
Yeah.
And the first few, like you said, were really fascinating.
Yeah.
You're mostly going down from this direction.
Okay.
In the canal, you're mostly going down. So it's you sailing to the lock, the little gate closing behind you, and then the water draining out of the lock until your water level gets really low.
Right. So you're sailing towards Paris.
Exactly.
Right.
Towards the sun.
Right. Because the the water comes from 100 and something kilometers northeast of Paris, so it flows towards the center of Paris. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I feel it important to point out that the boat ride is narrated with a guide the entire way. Unfortunately, and I am bilingual, I do understand and speak French, although not as well as I used to.
But still, you're good.
I found him difficult to understand, and I do understand French. He was speaking very quickly. It was obviously very memorized dialogue, and he was just kind of slurring through it.
Yeah.
So the French part was difficult, but when he spoke English, it was worse. In fact, my husband said, it sounds like he's still speaking a foreign language, even though I know he's speaking English. And he was a nice enough guy, and he had lots of interesting facts. But after a while, I started to tune him out because it was a bit of a burden to understand him. So I don't know if he's always the tour guide on that
right. You could
trip.
have gotten, a bad one.
Right. And there are some interesting facts, but after he's explained how the locks work and why, and that's my understanding too, that a big part of creation of bringing drinking water into Paris, but also bringing water pressure up into the city too.
Okay.
That was a big part of it too. Like, it was contributing to the water pressure for the city as well.
Well, you need volume. Yeah.
Exactly. You need volume. You need water coming from a higher place coming to a lower place to create that pressure. Yeah. Other than that, then as we started, he started filling in with like random filler facts, which while interesting, were not super, relevant. Like, oh, here's the building where the guy who they think stole the Mona Lisa hid it for a while. Yeah. Things like that. Just random historical facts.
May or may not have hidden here.
Yeah, exactly.
If he was hiding, how do you know?
So I think what would be interesting is if there was some kind of pre-recorded thing you could listen to as you were going down the canal. I think it probably would have been
easier. Yeah.
Easier to understand.
Yeah. That's a problem sometimes in France. You get a tour guide and you're like, I have no idea what this person is saying.
Right. And it's interesting because, and even my husband pointed out, because he doesn't speak any French, and he pointed out that the one we went to on the Canal de Midi, and I'm sorry I keep comparing the two, but it's so easy. But that one we went out of Carcassonne, she not only narrated everything first in French, then in English, then in Spanish. But she did the whole thing. She would say, and she did it really, both her French and her English were really good.
Yeah. Well, the problem is when they get monotone, when they've done this visit so many times that you can tell they're totally boring themselves to tears. How could you possibly be engaged by a person that, by that? It doesn't happen that often, but sometimes it does. Yeah. Yes.
And he was definitely not doing it with any personality. And I think the fact that he was just kind of slurring through this memorized, it was making it very difficult to understand him in French.
Yeah.
So as we progress through the canal, the thing that one thing to remember too is that being in Paris, it's a very urban canal. So it's cutting through the backs of buildings, through the, you're seeing like the trash cans that they stuff behind the buildings and the things that are along the canal. They're not showing you the prettiest parts you're not seeing the prettiest parts of these buildings either. Right. So, and you're seeing all the homeless people shoved up along the side. Paris is just like any other big city. Lots of homeless. I live near Los Angeles. Lots of homeless people in LA too.
Yeah.
But, you're going to see that where they're kind of hidden in there and they've got the little tents set up and whatever.
Yeah. And it's been worse recently. They have a lot of refugees from, the Middle Eastern conflict. And it's too bad that these people can't be settled somewhere nicer. It becomes overwhelming when you have a lot of them,
Yes, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with that. And I did notice an increase in homeless in Paris this time over 2 years ago when I was there. And definitely probably because of Syria, which is sad.
Yeah. Oh, it is definitely very sad. And, when I went, and I'm going to, well, I don't know. Should I tell you about when I went or should we finish yours first?
It's your podcast.
Really? No, let's finish your thought and then I'll tell you how it went for me. Okay. So you were noticing a bunch of homeless people and you were going the back
all
way.
Along the canal.
Yeah.
And when we're seeing the back sides of these buildings, the trash cans and the things that, people are tucked behind the buildings where they don't want, everybody does that, right? They
behind my house. Yeah, there's stuff too.
Exactly.
I mean,
so that's part of the buildings you're seeing. And you're seeing a lot of the more modern buildings that were built in like you were talking about in the 60s, the 70s that aren't particularly all that attractive. We're not seeing Haussmann Paris over here at all.
No.
All right. So I have to say the highlight of the whole trip, and you're going to laugh, but the highlight is when we hit the river and everybody stood up and you could tell once we did that last lock. And, I'm sorry. I'm missing the tunnel. Let me backtrack a minute before I talk about when we got on the river. So we got into the tunnel. We did 2 locks to get into the tunnel, one right after the other, because we had to lower quite a bit. It was, as you see up to it and you see the entrance, it's like you can barely see it and you're thinking, how the heck are we ever going to get in there? Yeah. Well, you go into one lock, you go about halfway down, and then you move to the second lock and you go the full rest of the way. And then you're about almost 2 kilometers, I guess, in this tunnel.
Right.
And it's not too high above your head because from what I understand, they used to, the men would be on their backs moving the barge along by moving their legs across the top of the top of the tunnel. Yeah, they push with their legs.
So what I read was that they had steam engines, but maybe they also had people pushing some of the way.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe just to get into it, I'm not sure. It's pretty wide in there. They do have the light on, so you can see to the either side, but it is pretty dark. And then each tunnel or the roof of the tunnel or the top of the tunnel, they have like you can see the little potholes. They have grates over them. So they're just kind of like skylights going up into and letting the air in.
Okay. Yeah, because if it's 2 kilometers, that's a long way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So out of the 4.5 kilometers, 2 of them are covered up.
I don't know if it's a full 2. I want to say it's like maybe a 1.5 kilometers, but it's pretty long.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
You're in there for a while, but it moves fast because you've already gone through the locks. And like I said, that's the most time-consuming part of going through the canal is going through the locks.
Yeah, and I know it goes under Place de la République. It goes under some really famous places in Paris, and you just don't know that it's under your feet,
No, exactly. You're just looking up and seeing this grate and the sky and maybe some leaves, and trees.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting.
And then once you come out of the tunnel, then there's a short stretch again, and that's the marina. So that's where you see all kinds of little barges and sailboats and everything and I assume that's where people who have sailed into Paris moor their boats there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's probably people who just have a boat and they
just live on their boat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's that part, the marina, and you go through that area and you see all the different little boats. That was interesting, seeing all the little barges and boats and sailboats and whatnot. And then we hit the gate to go out into the river. And that's, of course, when everybody stood up to look, because that's when you have the real scenery. And that stretch from the river to the quay right in front of the Musée d'Orsay. Yeah. That maybe took 15 minutes. And it was lovely. You see everything, right? You go right past Ile de la Cité.
But on that point, you're on the Seine.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
you're not on Canal Saint-Martin anymore, yeah.
No. So once you're on the Seine, you're just doing the normal Bateau Mouche route, right?
Yeah.
You're not getting quite as far because Bateau Mouche goes from before Ile Saint-Louis all the way around to La Tour Eiffel, all the way up.
Yeah.
So that's a much longer route. And instead, the canal boat will stop right at the Musée d'Orsay, which is right before the bend of the river that takes you over to the Eiffel Tower.
Right. So you do see quite a bit of the Seine as well. I mean, you see some of it anyway. Yeah.
Right. You go right by Ile Saint-Louis. You go right by the Cité. You see the Conciergerie. You see Notre Dame.
Yeah, you see all the pretty parts.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, you feel robbed. You'd be like, hey, I've seen nothing but homeless people sleeping outside. Like, I want my money back.
So my assessment is that if you're really interested in the mechanics of the canal, then you're going to love this because it will show you all of that. And of course, going through the tunnel, but don't do it for seeing the city. You're not going to see any pretty parts until you hit the Seine River, and you'd be better off taking a Bateau Mouche.
Right.
For that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good to know. Okay, so now let me tell you what I did. I drove there because we didn't have a lot of time left. This is before we head out south. And so it was Sunday morning. I woke up and I thought, I'm going to go take some pictures of Canal Saint-Martin. Before I leave, I need to see some of that. And so we drove to the upper part and then I kept on parking badly and going down a little way and shooting a few pictures and do that again and again and again. And I was like, and the whole time, we saw a lot of trash. We saw a lot of things that are just not that attractive. And I thought, if somebody invited me to some loft for a fun party or a fun restaurant or something, I would love this place. But just walking along the banks is really not that good of an experience. Not to me, And I was with my my cousin, who lives in Paris. And she told me this trick. She said, the way you know if it's a good neighborhood or not in Paris is if there's a Monoprix, a grocery store brand, Monoprix, you know that it's a well-to-do neighborhood because that's the most expensive groceries in Paris. So you can see by the brand name of the grocery stores around if you're in a good neighborhood or not. Because I was asking her, how do people figure this out? If this is a nice neighborhood or not? And she says, well, when you're in the 9th and the 10th, you're fine, but then you go to 19th and 20th with the canal, and that's not so nice. The higher up you go, the less nice it gets. So it seems to me maybe if you're going to do this at all, stay as close to the Seine as you can, maybe. But of course, not the covered part, because then you wouldn't. I mean, you can't walk down the covered part, right? I don't think you can. Did you see any walkers?
On the covered part, you mean the part where all I could see was leaves and sky when we were looking.
Okay, so you couldn't see one way or the other. Yeah, there might have been a path, but you didn't see it, and you probably wouldn't want to go down there. I mean,
and I gotta tell you, right? And there are parts of that canal I would never walk down.
Yeah. So there you go. We found yet another place in Paris that I really can't recommend. I mean, if it's a thing you love because you love canals, then sure, why not? But if it's just something that you've heard bloggers talk about as the new hip place, I don't know, it might be hip in a while, but I think the attraction for people who live in Paris is that it's fairly direct to get to, in and out of, there's a lot of public transportation. And that really matters in a big city like Paris. You want very few changes to get to your destination, to your job or whatever. So I can see the attraction there. But as a tourist thing, not really. Do we agree?
I agree.
All right.
Yes, I agree.
We agree. Awesome. Any other words of wisdom about this canal?
Yeah, just another plug for the Canal du Midi in the southwest of France.
It's true.
If you want to see a great canal.
Yeah, it's very nice. And I mean, you will see some homeless people some of the way. Like when you go through Toulouse, although they've cleaned it up a lot, but through Toulouse, there around the train station, there were a lot of homeless people, and they've moved them last winter. But now that it's summer, I don't know. They might be back. You know, it's hard to know with populations like this. And you know, in a way, it's good that France doesn't have really strict vagrancy laws, and that we try to help these populations of people who have a hard time fitting in. But on the other hand, when it's right along a major, you know, tourist attraction, it really looks like, That's how,
and you know, with any big city, it's expected. And so I'm not being critical of the homeless situation in Paris as much as I'm just not understanding what the appeal was to the Canal Saint-Martin.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we had another person on the show. It was episode 111. His name was David Palachek, and he actually said that they wanted to go see the Canal Saint-Martin because they had heard so much about it. And it's the only place in Paris where he felt uncomfortable and unsafe. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go see it for myself, because I thought, wow, you know, Paris has never given me that impression. I didn't feel uncomfortable and unsafe per se, because
I wouldn't go that far either.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far either.
It was a Sunday morning, you know, there weren't that many people. It was a sleepy Sunday morning. There wasn't that much happening. But I mean, if I had gotten there, you know, on evening and there was a fight going on between homeless people or something, it would have felt very, you know, threatening. Because that happens, obviously. So I would say Canal Saint-Martin, it's meh. Yeah, like meh.
Or as the French would say, bof.
Bof. Bof. Triple bof. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some nice restaurants along there. I haven't really checked on that. But maybe there are venues along there that people go to that they love. It's possible that residents find something really interesting about it that would be totally uninteresting to visitors. You know, it's very different living in a city and just visiting a city, I think. And that's true anywhere. So, yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, people are looking for different things.
Right.
They have different goals for visiting places.
That's right.
Depending on if they're a resident or if they're a tourist.
Yep. All right, Brenda, thank you so much. I'll have you back because we saw some other things together. So I'll have you back very soon so we can talk about some of these other areas that we have seen together.
Awesome. Don't be a stranger, Annie.
All right, I won't. All right. Bye, Brenda. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Many thanks to listeners who donate to the show or use our Amazon or hotel booking links on joinusinfrance.com or on the show notes that appear on the podcasting app on your phone. Most new listeners find the show through a recommendation from a friend. If you're the kind of fan who drops our name here and there, bless you and thank you for your help. I hope you have a great time in France, and when you come back, consider sharing your experience and thoughts with other listeners. Drop me a line, Annie@joinusinfrance.com, if you'd like to do a trip report with me. Thank you. Au revoir. This episode is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivatives International License.